Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The House is losing many fine members at the end of this session, and I wish them all well. There's one retiring member I want to say a few words about today. That member is my good friend, Louie Gomer. Louie and I came to Congress in the 109th in the year 2005 in a relatively small class, but that class had 5 fine Texans, 3 of whom have already retired. Louie Gomer has been a great friend and an extremely dedicated patriot and representative. He's been actually a great friend to all people in this body. He is kind and gentle. He is very serious.
Twitter, now, Eric Erickson retweeted, win with JMC, Georgia turnout thread.
I know he's often been frustrated by the actions of both the House and the Senate, but he has continued to work diligently to make our country, and indeed the entire world, better. The highest compliment I think I can pay him is that he is a good man who has always sought to do good. Our country has been blessed by Louie Gomer throughout his life.
Twitter, now, Fox News just tweeted, Idaho murders, slain students' family plans to hire lawyer amid tensions with police. Fox News 3 youth.
But we'll pray that God will continue to bless you, Kathy, and your daughters. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to celebrate Orange County Fire Authority Chief Brian Fennessy for receiving the 2022 California Fire Chief of the Year Award. As California continues to see worsening fire seasons, Orange County families are fortunate to have a leader like Chief Fennessy who is dedicated to making our communities safer. Since joining the Orange County Fire Authority in 2018, Chief Fennessy has placed a strong focus on community outreach, fire mitigation, and disaster preparedness. He has also equipped his firefighters with the tools and training that they need to be safe and to keep us safe.
Twitter, now, Eric Erickson retweeted, Party Matter, police car revolving lights, mansion energy permitting bill in all likelihood not going to be in must pass defense bill. House Armed Services Committee Chair Adam Smith says,
I congratulate
it doesn't
Chief
have votes.
Fennessy on
Twitter.com/ArtyMatter/stat.
and look forward to continue working with him and the wonderful Orange County Fire Authority team. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
It's unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Texas recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize a young man from Houston, Texas, who, as long as he can remember, wanted to be a police officer. DJ Daniel was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and spine cancer when he was just
Twitter,
8
now,
years old,
Shazam just tweeted,
and has
Bloody
undergone
Mary by Lil Dicky is now the most Shazam song in the world,
surgeries.
Party Popper.
And
Attachment.
he has spent half of his life battling cancer. I cannot think of a braver young man than DJ. Given 5 months to live, he has made it his mission to be sworn in by 100 law enforcement agencies. And 3 years later, here it is, 3 years later, and he has been sworn in by 743 police departments across the country. DJ has made a tremendous impact on many across the nation and is a shining example of what makes Texas so great.
Okay, Do Not Disturb is now on.
Anyone who has followed DJ's story will be the first to say how he embodies the qualities we look for in law enforcement. Strength, courage, resilience, and selflessness are all traits I've heard describing DJ. May God bless him, his family. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana, seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to encourage all my colleagues to continue the work with all urgency to finalize the pending fiscal year 2023 appropriations measure. Notably, for Indiana's 1st congressional district, I would highlight the vital importance of the community-funded projects included in these measures that will grow the Northwest economy. For example, I am grateful for the inclusion of specific funds that will support economic development at the Michigan City Harbor, construction for improvements to Central Avenue in Portage, and the expansion of a cargo operations at the Gary Chicago International Airport. I urge my colleagues to continue to prioritize completing these necessary works so that we can support economic growth and job creation in Northwest Indiana and communities throughout our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to strongly support H.R. 3462, the SBA Cyber Awareness Act, which I introduced with Representative Jason Crow to improve cybersecurity and transparency at the Small Business Administration. The SBA provided a record number of services during the COVID-19 pandemic to provide a lifeline to small businesses in need. But with that, the SBA also saw issues with their IT capabilities being able to keep up and safely store applicants' personal information. We must ensure entrepreneurs can safely access resources available to them and have the confidence that the SBA has the tools to keep their information safe from cyber attacks. Our bill will do exactly that. Additionally, H.R. 3462 safeguards our supply chain by protecting SBA's IT components from the CCP's malign influence. I want to thank all my colleagues who helped to pass this bill, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of members of the military have terminated their service for our country because of the COVID military vaccine mandate. Thousands more have chosen early retirement, and thousands have not enlisted. Recruitment is down. Our national security is suffering because of this. It's time to treat the men and women of our military who've signed up and pledged their lives to defend this country with the respect they deserve. It's time to get rid of the COVID vaccine mandate for the military. My bill, H.R. 3860, would do that. I introduced it in June of 2021. Since then, we've garnered over 90 co-sponsors for that bill. I urge my colleagues, as they consider the language of the National Defense Authorization Act this week, to include the language of H.R. 3860 to protect the brave men and women of our military. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I'd like to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Wisconsin recognized for 1 minute.
I'd like to address the problems in China, the protests in China, and the degree to which perhaps the largest American corporation, Apple Corporation, out of sheer greed, is weighing in and preventing protesters from communicating with each other. Their CEO, Tim Cook, who's making over $90 million a year, is right now preventing airdrops from being made between different protesters. Without communicating with each other, those protests will not succeed. China right now has one of the most repressive regimes in the world, atheistic totalitarianism. It has been the greatest threat to freedom in this country for the last 100 years. And it is disappointing, though perhaps not surprising, that American corporations, the wealthiest country in the world, cannot resist shutting down free speech in China to make a few more dollars. I urge Congress to act and do something with these large corporations, who in America as well have a monopoly on free speech, a monopoly on communication, and are using it to support the atheistic totalitarianism. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's raining in California finally. I know that song from the 70s would say otherwise, but we're seeing some relief from the drought. It's partially man-made, partially government-made by letting all our water run to the ocean instead of the farms and to people. But that said, our fire season is also over for a while in the most of the state. But let me just remind you, this map here is just a portion of Northern California. This half of this fire area is about 1 million acres from last year, called the Dixie Fire. Many other fires in just last 4 years representing about 2 million acres, just in one section of one state. This calls out the need, even though it's the off-season, we've forgotten about the fire now because it's raining, to have forest management that's actually effective. We need the U.S. Forest Service to take this issue head on instead of more talk, more mealy-mouthed, more plans, treating maybe 1 million acres a year, 2 million acres per year, when the Forest Service has under its charge 200 million acres. We need to bring in the private sector and everybody we can to get ahead on forest thinning, forest management, so we don't keep burning our communities down and causing all the air pollution, water quality issues, loss of wildlife, and meanwhile import for the second leading importer of lumber in the world. What are we doing here?
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Speaker, I rise today to talk about the horrible and despicable plight of Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan, among other hostages of United States citizens held around the world in this particular situation by a despot who wants to use Brittany as a pawn. This wonderful young woman, 6'9", Olympian, is now being taken to a labor camp of vicious conditions, food that is disgraceful, conditions that are disgraceful, and it is only because the selfish despot that wants to eliminate democracy, live in a oppressive society, wants to use her as a vicious pawn. I warn Americans, when a former president suggests they want to suspend the Constitution, watch Iran, that is killing people in the streets simply because they want freedom and democracy, and watch Russia every day. It's been said, oh, you made a highlight or a star out of Brittany Griner. No, it was the outcry of her family and community that said, we just want her home. We want Paul Whelan, a former veteran or a veteran, home. But yet this vicious and vile leader thinks that he's got something he can dangle in front of our eyes. I demand that we get strong-handed with him. This young woman needs to be brought home to her family, and it is a disgrace that we cannot get her home. I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader. Under the Speaker's announced policy,
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about the hundreds, no thousands of DACA recipients and dreamers who inspire us every day with their art, resiliency, and strength. Their stories of success, hope, and dreams are the stories of our country and those who truly believe in the American dream. Last week, I went to the Kennedy Center, one of the world's most prestigious performing arts venues, here in this very city to see the Ballet Hispanico. There, I saw Hugo Pisano Orozco, an artist, a dancer, and a dreamer. He is a constituent of mine from Española, New Mexico. Hugo and his family are originally from Guanajuato, Mexico. He came to the United States before he was 2 years old. After moving from Mexico to Española, he fell in love with the art that is dance. He attended the New Mexico School for Arts, which is a very prestigious school in New Mexico dedicated to the arts. But like many others, his future remained uncertain because of his immigration status. As a senior, he didn't know if his DACA status would be granted. Once it was finally approved, though, he applied and was accepted to Juilliard, one of the world's most prestigious performing arts schools. Today, he is a renowned dancer and on tour with Ballet Hispanico. I have a picture of him here because he does inspire with his art form. He inspires me. He soars across the dance floor at the Kennedy Center. I was moved. And so I asked him for his permission to highlight his story, his inspiration to our community and to America of what our dreamers can do when we let them live their dream, when we let them accomplish what they are capable of doing in our beautiful country. His story reminds us of the inspiring stories of thousands of dreamers across our country. His family brought him to the United States in search of a better life, and he found his American dream. His story reflects the best of us and what the American dream is truly about: hope and dreams for a better future. Like so many others, his story inspires me, gives me hope, and why I stand here today. He soars from New Mexico and graces America with his stunning performances, but we find dreamers in every state, in every community. I want to echo his words today. He said, I quote, "Don't think because you're from a small town in New Mexico, you can't go out there and do the things you want to do," end quote. We need to remember that small things can do, that small places can do big things. Yes, small places can do big things. Our dreamers come from all walks of life, small towns, big cities, the rural areas, suburbia, everywhere. They believe they could do more, and with the DACA, they have done more. Like Cindy Nava, a fellow New Mexican who came from Chihuahua, New Mexico, seeking a better life. Now as a 35-year-old, she's actually the first ever DACA recipient to achieve a presidential appointment to work in the Biden administration as a senior policy advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She now works for Marcia Fudge. Hugo and Cindy are two of the more than 5,000 DACA recipients who make New Mexico a more vibrant place to live. But none of this would have been possible if we didn't have DACA. With the recent court rulings, however, DACA is in immediate danger. We need our Senate Republican colleagues to rise to the moment. We passed out of this House in spring of 2021 the Dream and Promise Act. We now need the Senate to act and work with us to pass a bipartisan legislation before the end of the year, because it is now or never for our dreamers. I would now like to recognize the gentlewoman from my vecina from Texas for as long as she may take.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Speaker, I rise to call upon our colleagues in the Senate to protect DACA recipients before the end of this Congress. 6 years old, Mr. Speaker, 6 years old. That's the average age recipients of DACA were when they first entered the U.S. through no fault of their own. Known as dreamers, these young people have served in our military, attended our schools, and worked in our communities. They've grown up here, eagerly contributing to our neighborhoods and the diversity that makes America great. They are Americans in their heart, in their soul, and in their minds, because this is the only country that they have known. Many of them are now educated doctors, trusted lawyers, committed school teachers, and essential workers. In fact, more than 200,000 of them worked as essential workers during the pandemic, keeping us safe, keeping us healthy. Now, because of right-wing attacks on our community's all-stars, their futures is uncertain. Madam Speaker, dreamers need action, and they need it now. In my home state, In Texas, nearly 100,000 Dreamers are at risk are facing risk of deportation, and 30,000 of them live in my hometown of Houston. They are not strangers. They're not Martians coming in from some alien nation. We're talking about our friends, our neighbors, people we go to church with, people we buy groceries with, people that are just down the street, and they are also part of our families. For our community, it is now or never. The Senate must put Dreamers over the political tactics of fear and hate. It's simple. We need to put people over politics. We need to put Dreamers over rhetoric. The time is now. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back to Ms. Fernandez.
Thank you so very much, Representative Garcia. And we know that Americans want DACA to become codified. They want our Dreamers to live here. Indeed, in the United States, we know that a bipartisan poll conducted in October 22 found overwhelming support. Democrats, independents, Republicans all support this. Democrats support it at 93%, independents at 75%, and our Republican neighbors, they also support it at 71%. This needs to happen. This needs to happen for us to truly live up to the promise that we could be. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus is holding this special order hour. I welcome all of my colleagues who have come to speak here before us today. But right now, I'd like to recognize our chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who has come with his twins, his two daughters, to share with us his thoughts on Dreamers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, as a father of these two beautiful daughters of mine, Sky and Sage, to call on the Senate to act now for Dreamers. This October, the Fifth Circuit Court ruled that the DACA program is unlawful and set the stage for this incredibly successful and popular program to be struck down by the conservative courts in Texas. If Congress does not act by the end of this year, the future of thousands of Dreamers will be on the line. Dreamers like Juan Vasquez from my district, in fact from Mecca, who as a senior in high school was detained by ICE while working in the fields as a farm worker with his parents to help them pay the bills. After taking him under my wing as a pre-med student, Juan graduated top of his class from UC Berkeley and finished top of his class at UC San Francisco School of Medicine. Now, he saves lives. He saves American lives. He saves fathers and mothers and children's daughters and sons and grandparents every day as an emergency medicine resident in New York City. I think I had some influence being an emergency physician myself and mentoring him in that path. But if DACA ends, Juan and hundreds of thousands of others will lose their jobs, impacting labor market sectors already experiencing shortages such as healthcare, education, service industries, food productions, and more. If DACA ends, our economy would lose more than $250 billion in lost GDP over the next decade. If DACA ends, prices will go up. If DACA ends, we will see dire and insurmountable ripple effects across our communities and local economies. So, for the sake of doing what is right and good and just, and for the sake of our economy, and for the hundreds of thousands of Dreamers who call our nation home and have known no other home, I call on the Senate, Republicans, to join in good faith negotiations to find a permanent solution for Dreamers based on the House-passed Dream and Promise Act, use it as the framework. And I urge every member of this body, Republicans and Democrats, to join the Congressional Hispanic Caucus in advocating for a bipartisan DACA deal to be included in the end-of-the-year omnibus package. So we absolutely must deliver peace of mind for dreamers and their families, keep their families together, and create opportunity for our economy. The time to act is now. The time of urgency is now. Thank you. And I want to thank you, Chairwoman, for your leadership, for being vice chair of the communications for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, because your voice is powerful. Your voice carries on. Your voice is a voice of true leadership that will continue and be generational. And I appreciate this special hour to advocate for our dreamers and to protect DACA.
Well, Chairman, I want to thank you for bringing Sky and Sage to the floor of the House today, because as we look at these beautiful, intelligent, curious children, and curious is one of the best things to be, you know, because that means you're curious about the world around you. They are the age of many of our DACA recipients who came with their parents and searched. Their parents came. They made this choice. And the children came with them. And this is the only home many of the DACA recipients have ever known. And what have they done in this home? They have brought so many of us joy. They have helped make our schools vibrant. They are caring for our children, for your children, as doctors, as teachers, as nurses, as accountants. I mean, they're all walks of life, right? Some of them choose to go into accountancy. We have the stories here, numerous from every state and every district, of those who chose to apply for DACA protections. Right now, we know that because of the Fifth Circuit decision that declared DACA unlawful, that these hundreds of young dreamers and families are afraid for their futures. And we must act. I would now yield such time as he may require to the gentleman from California, Congressman Correa.
Thank you very much. And Madam Speaker, if I may, I just wanted to say that the dreamer issue is not about immigrants. It's about America. Dreamers are the perfect kind of immigrant that you want in this country. They follow the law. They pay taxes. They're either gainfully employed or have to be studying in order to qualify as a dreamer under the DACA program. 70 to 80% of all Americans, Democrats and Republicans, support a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. There are friends, there are neighbors, firefighters, police officers, and they also serve in the military. Here, poster of one of my constituents, Jose Angel Garibay. He was the first service member from Orange County to make the ultimate sacrifice for America after 9/11 in Iraq. He died as a dreamer, as a non-citizen. Later on, this body saw it appropriate to give him U.S. citizenship posthumously. Jose shouldn't have waited until after he passed away to become a U.S. citizen, because he made the ultimate sacrifice for his new country, the only country he knew, the United States of America. I'm proud to inform you that I represent probably the largest number of dreamers in the country. Orange County, California. Orange County, that county that Ronald Reagan used to say was the place that good Republicans would go to die. Not very long ago, my daughter came home with two of her very good friends. They're both very scared, crying, said, "We're dreamers. Are we going to be deported? What do we do?" Good, sweet young ladies, students. And I told them, I said, you keep studying hard, you keep working hard, you keep following the law, you keep being a good person, and let us work on legislation in Washington. Today, my simple ask from the Senate is, do the right thing. Stop treating dreamers as political footballs when you kick them whenever it's appropriate. I ask the Senate to please pass the dreamer legislation and give those 2 million dreamers the opportunity to earn, not to be given, but earn a pathway to the American dream. Again, 70 to 80% of Americans agree with this concept. Let's do our job. Let's continue to keep America as the greatest country in the world. Madam Speaker, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing us the story of such bravery and such sacrifice. Because across this country, the dreamers are participating in every single aspect of our lives, whether it be defending our country in the United States or abroad. They are firefighters. I have a story here of an amazing firefighter who is from Sacramento, California, and was one of the first firefighters who, as a dreamer. He has now moved on and is pursuing additional studies so that he can pursue a career in providing in health to serve as a PA. And we know that in so many of our areas, we don't have enough doctors and nurses and PAs and nurse practitioners, and yet this dreamer is engaged in that very area of study. And over again, if we deny the dreamers their ability to continue to contribute to our country, we will suffer, whether that be in the area of health, as we just heard from one of our speakers, from our chair, or the area of the arts, or as the numerous teachers, the numerous dreamers have chosen as their area of expertise and their way of giving back to teach our youngest. I would now like to yield to the gentleman from Illinois. Congressman, please share with us what you know is happening in Illinois with the numerous dreamers that live in both your city and in your state.
Thank you, Representative Fernandez and Madam Speaker. I rise today with fellow members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus because we're running out of time to save the DACA program. And we can save the program through congressional action in the waning days of this Congress. Since 2012, DACA has created a glimpse of hope. DACA provides temporary legal status to thousands of people who no other country than ours in the United States. They are our teachers, our nurses, our firefighters, our friends, our neighbors, and our loved ones. Let's be clear, 75% of the American people support DACA. We know it strengthens our economy and makes us a better country, and both Republicans and Democrats agree. Still, the program has faced multiple court challenges, and if we don't do something to save it, the program will end. We need to save the DACA program, not only because it grows our economy, but because it's simply the right thing to do. Let me tell you Yesenia's story. When it became time for a driver's license in high school, Yesenia's teacher forced her to provide a Social Security card, even though he knew Yesenia was undocumented and did not plan to get a license and had no real need to bring a Social Security card to class. When Yesenia was unable to produce a Social Security card, a classmate mocked her, saying, "She can't bring it because she's illegal." Yesenia nearly broke down in tears. Thanks to DACA, Yesenia was afforded a stability she's never known, no longer carrying the fear of being deported or separated from her family. Or think about Elizabeth. She would wake up at 3:30 a.m. every day to prepare tamales and sell them before hurrying to school. She did this through elementary and middle school. Classmates belittled Elizabeth, calling her La Tamalera. Like Yesenia, Elizabeth applied for DACA when the program was created. Eventually, Elizabeth saved enough by selling tamales to pay her way through college. This is what they do. This is who they are. Both Elizabeth and Yesenia are my constituents. And to my colleagues in the Senate, DACA recipients are your constituents too. Every DACA recipient has a story of homes lost and new homes found, stories of growing up, stories of pain and perseverance that demand action. Ending DACA will shatter the lives of nearly 2 million people in our country brought here as children, and it will hurt their families as well. It will separate families and tear communities apart. The stakes could not be higher. The end of DACA would uproot the lives of 600,000 DACA recipients in addition to the more than 1.3 million migrants eligible for the program. Aside from the fact that DACA recipients pay almost $10 billion in taxes each year, aside from the fact that more than 200,000 DACA recipients across the country stepped up for us as frontline workers during the pandemic, our obligation to save DACA above all else is a moral one. It's about who we are as a country. The House has done its job. We passed the Dream and Promise Act, and now we need the Senate to act on it. It's time to step up, save DACA, and codify it through congressional action.
Thank you so much, Congressman Garcia. And thank you so much for sharing the economic impacts of DACA recipients. Because we need to highlight that any opposition to the Dream and Promise Act is not based on the benefits it brings to our country, because the economic benefits are amazing. And that's, I so appreciate the fact that you raised it. You know, you said how much taxes are paid. Households with DACA recipients pay $5.6 billion in federal taxes and $3.1 billion in state and local taxes every single year. And they create lots of after-tax income that leads to economic activity in the communities that they come from. In fact, the importance of DACA and our Dreamers is so great that we had on October 20th, 80 major businesses and trade associations wrote to congressional leaders in support of a bipartisan Dream and Promise Act. The letter was signed by, among others, the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Retail Federation, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Microsoft, Amazon, and many, many more, because we know that Dreamers are essential to our economy. And what would happen if we let DACA die? If we let DACA die, an average of 1,000 Dreamers will lose their jobs each week in labor markets already experiencing shortages such as healthcare, education, service industries, food production, and more, because they'd lose their jobs as their ability to renew would disappear. So every week we would lose that. It's like a drum, a drumbeat towards financial trouble when we already need to address the need for more workers in our country. We would lose the benefit that they develop for our economy, $400 billion in economic benefit if we pass the Dream and Promise Act. Because we need to say, we're not just trying to save DACA. We actually want DACA to end because we're going to replace it with the Dream and Promise Act. We are looking for the Dream and Promise Act because that ends DACA the way it should, not by death to a court that doesn't understand the benefit of this, but to the codification to give our dreamers the path to citizenship they deserve. And that's why we are calling upon the Senate. We're asking to have all of the Democrat senators presently support the Dream and Promise Act. So what we are looking for is 10 Republican senators to join with the Chamber of Commerce, to join with the trade associations, to join with the people across this country, to join with their own constituents. I think we need to remember the amount of Republicans who support the Dream and Promise Act in the 70s. You know, it is what our constituents want us to do. It is what the Senate constituents want them to do from whatever state you're at. And we must ask the Senate to take action now. Let's codify this. Let's not punt down the road any more times. Let's actually pass the Dream and Promise Act. Everybody wants it because we know that without it, the consequences are dire. I also want to remind everybody that many of these dreamers are in mixed status households, as we say. The dreamers live with their children, if they're old enough, who are citizens. They live with spouses who may be citizens and legal residents, and they provide for the families at the same time that they are providing for our communities. They are providing for their families. And they come from many, many countries, not just Latin American countries. If you'll notice up here, I cannot read it, but Koreans. We have many, many DACA recipients who speak Korean. We have DACA recipients who speak all of the different languages of our world because they come from the many countries of our world to the United States. They have been brought here. And once here, well, we have to remember the Dream and Promise Act has been introduced time and time again. And the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, was put in place as a placeholder so that we could pass the Dream and Promise Act. The placeholder is calling upon us now to act. The placeholder must be replaced with the Dream and Promise Act so that our children, those who will lead us up and will lead great lives in our community, can find that path to citizenship. And so that's what we are asking our colleagues in the Senate to do. We sent you this bill months and months ago. You saw this bill in the 2015, you saw this bill in the 2016, you saw this bill in the 115th, 116th, 117th Congress. And now it's time to pass it. Now or never. Because we cannot wait. We cannot wait for the courts to act because Congress's duty is to act. Our duty is to see a problem and take action to correct it. In Jeremiah 29:11, God's plan for us is not to suffer, but to have prosperity, hope, and a future. Our job in Congress is to create that prosperity, hope, and a future. And this bill, the Dream and Promise Act, helps accomplish that plan to create prosperity, hope, and a future for those who have come and lived in our communities from the youngest of age. And so we call upon the Senate to act. On behalf of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I am proud to stand with my colleagues who stood here and spoke in favor of passing the Dream and Promise Act, because make no mistake, the DACA program is the result of the failure of Congress to live up to its obligation to create that prosperity, hope, and a future. And we need the DACA kids to continue their education. We need those who have been in this country from a very young age to be able to assert and have the protections of those who are presently enrolled in DACA. Dreamers have been raised and educated here. They work in our communities, they raise their families, they attend our colleges. They serve in our military. They die for the country and the home that they have known. We now ask Congress, we ask the Senate Republicans to hear those dreams and to pass the Dream and Promise Act. In whatever vehicle it must be, we urge them to consider including it in the omnibus, to include it in the NDAA, but to pass it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that we have. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on this special order.
Without objection. The gentlewoman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4, 2021, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Speaker Bowman. I appreciate that. Folks, it is my absolute honor and privilege to be here tonight to honor one of our very own Texans who has been here for 18 years. I'm calling this the Louie Gomer Special Order Hour, but when you realize how many hours he's been up here, probably more than anybody else we know, it doesn't seem to give it the fitting title. You know, there's no better way to honor my good friend Louie Gomer. If you see the picture over here, he's been on Fox News. He's a great drinker of Dr. Pepper, M&M peanuts, and all the things that Louie Gomer is known for. I had a friend the other day said, you know, Louie can be pushy and obstinate. And I said, really? I said, and my friend said, yeah, but he's actually the opposite now. He's obstinate and pushy. So I tell you what, Louie Gomer speaks his mind. He comes to this floor. He says a lot of the things, quite frankly, that we're thinking, you know, but a lot of people are not gutsy enough to say it. He's been a true patriot. He's a champion for Texas' 1st District, and he's a fighter for everyone's freedoms. Louie, we're going to miss you. Louie, could I impose upon you to come down front here? He's had quite a distinguished career since before he got into Congress, and then when he got what I like to say demoted to Congress. Ronald Reagan once said, infamously in a campaign, he will not make age an issue of the campaign. He was not going to exploit for political purposes his opponent's youth and inexperience. And talking about youth, Louie doesn't look like he's 69, does he? But I remember when he did, and I'll tell you what, he's a great friend of ours. Y'all didn't know this was going to be a roast, right? He's been a great friend of ours. Before I ever knew him, I saw him on Fox News so much of the time. Did she bring you Dr. Pepper? I saw him on Fox News so much of the time, and I always looked up to him. I knew that he was a man of conviction. He was a Christian. He spoke the truth the way it was. And I really looked up to him. So, you know, when I came to Congress, I kind of confided in him. I said, Louie, I'm beginning to have dreams. I keep seeing talking crickets, talking dogs, talking birds, talking cats, and even talking donkeys and elephants. What's wrong with me? You think Congress has pressured me? He said, no, you're just having Disney spells. Come on, that's funny, guys. Ba-boop-ba. Louie's always had a great sense of humor. He's always been someone that it was so wry and so right on with things. I always loved having a conversation with him. Louie, we appreciate you. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate you and what you tried to do for Texas, by the way. And I hope tonight will show through a little bit and a lot of our appreciation for you. You've never backed down for a fight from our freedoms. You've never backed down from fighting for our democracy. You've never backed down because sometimes the truth is hard to hear. Even if you sent the media into a frenzy quite a few times, I always admired that about you. To say that you're going to leave big shoes is an understatement. I mean, who else in the history, we might want to look this up, Chairman Bowman, who else in the history of this House has spent 17,340 minutes, 289 hours, and 12 days speaking on the House floor? Who else has done that? Probably nobody but our famous Louie Gomer. But you know what? Louie, you're going to leave a legacy of fighting tirelessly for what is good and right for the people you represent, not just in Texas, but in this country. Religious freedom not being the least of those, and we appreciate that about you. You've not only fought tirelessly for the people you represent, but you have fought for every single conservative. You know what? There's a lot of people who will never be able to vote for Louie Gomer, but he voted for them every day, and we appreciate that about you, Louie. You will leave Congress. You will be known for unapologetically fighting for and leading the conservative movement. Nobody has represented the conservative movement better than you have, Louie Gomer. And I want to tell you, with your stance for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and for Christian values, you leave some really big boots to fill. So thank you for all your hard work. We have a lot of friends here that want to say good things about you. They won't be as rough on you as I was, probably. And at this time, I want to yield good friend to my good friend Chip Roy, for what, minute, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. You got it. I yield 2 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Texas. Thank my friend, and I'm proud to be here on the floor with my friend from Texas. He is someone that I've looked up to for a very long time, and to have served with him for the last 2 terms, for the last 4 years, has been an honor. I wouldn't be in Congress but for his support. My parents lived just down the road from Pittsburgh, where he grew up. They lived in Mount Pleasant, Texas. It's actually when I first got to meet Congressman Gomer. And now to sit and serve in this body alongside of him, it truly is an honor. The poster talks about the Gomer Hour. We used to make our interns watch the Gomer Hour so they could learn from the great Louie Gomer. One of the favorite moments, of course, was when he spent 30 minutes hammering the architect of the Capitol because they told him not to grill his ribs on his office balcony. One of the greatest speeches delivered on the floor of the House, no doubt. And look, we already talked about 17,000 minutes or whatever the number was, 12 days. I took to heart watching the passion of Congressman Gomer coming to the floor of the House and using this floor to speak to the people, and using this floor to be able to communicate why we're here. We ought to do it more often. In fact, we ought to have debate and engagement with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I was inspired by Congressman Gomer to use this privilege, to use this time that we're given to be able to be the voice for the people who send us to Washington. And that is what Congressman Gomer has done. He's been a voice for the people of East Texas. He has represented them well. He is truly one of the most honest, honorable, and decent public servants that I have ever known. The reason that he's leaving this body has a great deal to do with his honor and his integrity and wanting to defend the people of Texas and to do it the right way.
I will miss you, Louie, but I know you're not going to be too far away. I will leave you with this. During a speech in one of the famous Gomer hours, Congressman Gomer said, quote, his SAT score would shock people who think I'm the dumbest member of Congress. Well, nothing could be farther from the truth. He is one of the smartest members, one of the best lawyers, one of the best human beings. It's been an honor to serve alongside you, my friend. We will see you soon in other areas of life. God bless you.
The gentleman yields back. I appreciate that, Mr. Roy. And at this time, I will represent our good friend from Virginia, Mr. Bob Good, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. And Louie Gomer is just as popular among my constituents in Virginia as he is among my esteemed colleagues, constituents from Texas. Louie was one of the first members of Congress to come and support me in my district when I started this journey 3 years ago, and he literally drove through the night to come down to Virginia to help a fledgling aspiring congressman down in the 5th District of Virginia. Louie, since I've gotten here, has been an example of courage, and I quickly observed him as a freshman being willing to go to the microphone time and again, not only to challenge the other side, but even to challenge our side when he felt they were wrong or weren't living up to the ideals that we promised to live up to as our constituents. I have admired him for his character and for his testimony on a personal level, his love for the Lord, for his love for our Savior Jesus Christ. Louie Gomer is one of those people you meet here in Congress who's the same here in person as he is on TV when folks watch him. And I am proud to learn from and serve with my true, courageous, conservative warrior. I'm proud to call Louie a friend on a personal level. He will be missed, and even in his leaving this Congress, he's leaving in a courageous, selfless act because he could have stayed here as long as he wanted to represent his district, but he loves his beloved state of Texas, and in a tremendous act of courage, he took personal risk in leaving this body. He's had a lifetime of service from being an Army captain to be a judge to being Chief Justice of the Supreme Court there in Texas. And he's had 18 years of courageous conservative service here in Washington. Thank you, Louie. I admire you and I love you, and I'm proud to call you a friend. God bless you. And I yield back.
And I thank the gentleman. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Bishop for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman. That'd be just great. And I don't know if I can fill up 2 minutes. One of the things that I do want to say about Louie Gomer, though, is that Louie is a hero to many, many Americans, and he is a hero to me. One of the pretty heady things about walking onto the floor of the United States House of Representatives is that you meet these people you've seen on your screens, television screens across the country that you've heard from, that have spoken the words that you wish you could have spoken. And Louie was one of the first heroes I met. Now, you meet some people who are not necessarily heroes, too, here. But Louie was a hero that I met maybe my first day walking on the floor. And he, others, you know, there's another thing about this place is that sometimes everything's been said, not everybody said it, but there are moments that having the opportunity to join the chorus is as important as anything I can think of. And to Louie Gomer, I say thank you for being a hero. Thank you for always being a loyal fighter for freedom. You know, all of us seem to fail. And sometimes at the moment we're most needed. Louie, you've never failed. You have persisted. And while sometimes I am uncertain how to fill up the time, you will stand on this floor and you will rely on your inner substance, and you can lay it out as long as you need to go to communicate to the American people, to communicate on their behalf, to say what matters. I don't know what we'll do without you. God bless you, Louie Gomer. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman yielding back. This time it's my pleasure to yield to Michael Cloud 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
You're up.
Yeah, appreciate it. Louie, we're going to miss you. You're my fellow Texan.
House colleague, and of course, it's been an honor to get to know you and to now be able to call you as a friend. I will definitely miss Louie Hour at the end of every week. We will definitely miss the ribs that are certainly worth the congressional mention in the record. But I remember the first time I met you, and I was a Texan, just grassroots, and you inspired me. I remember you speaking about the things that you were working to accomplish up here, and it was obvious a few things. One, that you hadn't forgotten who you were working for. It was obvious to me that you were compelled by your love for the Constitution and these founding principles our nation were built upon, and you were motivated by your deep and abiding faith. And those things resonated with me just as someone trying to make a difference where I could, and ultimately didn't know I was going to have the opportunity to be here and, of course, get to know you. And it's truly an honor to see and to watch your service. You've been a happy warrior who stands up, doesn't flinch, stands for what's right, what's just, and again, you haven't forgotten why you've been here. We've all seen people who can kind of get used to it, get comfortable to what's going on here. You haven't done that. You stayed true. You stayed true, and it's an honor to know you, and I just want to thank you for being a hero in this place on behalf of our nation, on behalf of our state. Thanks so much. God bless you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. It's now my privilege to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Bill Posey.
Thank you for yielding. Louie, the first person who reached her hand out to me when I got here was not you, it was Ron Paul. You were the second one, and got to know you good through Ron Paul's lunches, his wonderful lunches at his Liberty Caucus, and learned before I had ever heard you speak of what a true patriot you were. Don't know that there's ever been a more consistent member here since I've been here on principles, on policy, and on ethics than you, Louie Gomer. You've been a fearless voice for those that were voiceless, something which every member of Congress should aspire to be. You've been an advocate for what is right about America and a fierce opponent of what's not right for America. Congressman Gomer, you've always been well informed on a galaxy of issues that come before this body. And as always, you've been more than well prepared to fight for the good and against the bad. An honest, pragmatic, free thinker for sure. Congress could surely use more Louie Gomers, not less. We're going to miss you, Louie. Godspeed. Just don't know what we're going to do without you. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and at this time it's my pleasure to yield to Mr. Thomas Massey of Kentucky 2 minutes.
Thank the gentleman from Texas. There's not a more fierce fighter than Louie Gomer in this House, and if you have a bigger heart than Louie Gomer and you're serving in this House, I haven't met you yet. I'm sorry. I need to find you because I haven't found anybody with the heart the size of Louie Gomer's. One of the measures, I think, of a member here is how they treat their staff and how their staff responds to the member. And Louie Gomer attracts the best talent of anybody in this chamber, and they love him. We love Louie Gomer. I remember my first week in Congress, I was in conference, and we were going to elect a speaker. And nobody was challenging Speaker Boehner, and Louie Gomer got up to nominate somebody else. And he reminded us all that you didn't have to be a member of the House to be nominated for Speaker. And I was just praying that he didn't nominate Ron Paul because I knew I would have to second that nomination. And I leaned to the person next to me and I said, "Who is that guy making that nomination?" He said, "Oh, that's Louie Gomer. He's crazy." Well, within a week, I realized Louie Gomer was the only sane man in this chamber. And for 10 years, he's been guiding me. He has a photographic memory. Sharp as a whip, but a photographic memory. He's like an encyclopedia of everything that has happened in this chamber while he was here before I got here. So one day in conference, they were telling us, look, when the quarterback calls the play and snaps the ball, you don't execute another play. And they were imploring us to do something, frankly, that wasn't in the best interests of the people from Tyler, Texas. And I asked Louie, nor the interests of the people from Kentucky. I asked Louie, what are you going to do when the quarterback snaps the ball. He said, when the quarterback snaps the ball and runs for the wrong end zone, I'm not obligated to block for him. In fact, I might have to tackle him. So Louie Gomer has never been afraid to go against the grain when it means supporting the people from Texas 1st District, and that's the people that I want to thank for loaning us Louie Gomer, for having the good discernment to send him to Congress and to send him back. America has benefited from the good judgment of the people in Texas's 1st District, and we're going to miss you sorely. Very much, Louie. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. And Thomas, you came in with me in 2012, as I recall. And my second term, I was just a little bit of history here. When Louie Gomer decided to throw his name in the hat for Speaker, I was knowing him, believing to know him and his character, I said, I'm all in, Louie. It turned out that I was part of the Gomer caucus of 3 that voted for him for Speaker. Paid a price for it, of course, but Louie stood firm. Jim Bridenstine was the other one. And since they vote alphabetically, Bridenstine voted for Gomer, Gomer voted for Gomer. We already knew who the Speaker was going to be. It gets to the W's. Bridenstine's texting me and saying, don't leave us hanging. I said, I told Louie I was all on board. I'm all on board. So Weber put that Gomer name up there. He's been a fighter. Thank you, Thomas. That's a great remembrance. He's been a fighter and was always willing to put himself out there. It's my pleasure now to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pete Sessions.
Congressman Weber, thank you very much, not only for preparing this opportunity for us to honor our colleague and a member who will be leaving this body after a number of years, the great Judge and Congressman Louie Gomer. I rise tonight not just to honor Louie Gomer, but to probably say some things that not many members can say, and that is, I know Tyler, Texas, and I know Tyler, Texas well. I know many people there, and each of them not only speak well of Louie Gomer, but are pleased with his performance. They enjoy not only his representation, but they believe that he's a man who came to this town knowing who he is and will leave this town knowing who he is. And it would be the same person that came as the same person that's leaving. You know this, Judge Gomer, but I have the honor to take part of your congressional district that through redistricting has changed, and it gives me a time to come and reflect upon not only your friends in East Texas, Angelina County, and certainly places that are Crockett and Huntsville is a little bit south of district, but they asked me the other day when I was in Huntsville, do you know Louie Gomer? Because we were kind of thinking that before he said he was leaving, that he was going to come down here and be our congressman. And I said, well, that's the same thing they say in Lufkin and Nacogdoches. They say that in Crockett. They say that in Waco. And so there were a lot of fans all over Central Texas that not only admire Louie, but he speaks very eloquently about the things that are on their mind, that are front and center on his mind. So for your friends in Waco, for your friends in Dallas, for your friends in Huntsville, certainly across the district that you represent, Louie Gomer has not only made a name, but has, with his great passion and articulation, struck the heart of many people in Texas who deeply believe that Texas is special, that America is the greatest place in the world, and that we want to be one nation under God for as long as we can stay there. And Judge Gomer, you're going to be missed, but I look forward to catching up with you often and letting you know that there are a lot of people who thought you did a great job and did it well and are proud of you. I yield back my time to the gentleman from Texas.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding back, and I'll echo that, Congressman Sessions, that our district loves Louie Gomer. He was invited to speak. Unfortunately, his calendar wouldn't always permit it, but we did finally get him to come speak to us. And our District 14 on the Gulf Coast, I'm not sure we could have drawn your district that far down to the south, but there's a lot of people who would have sure loved that. And now I'm going to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Montana.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A lot of people have been speaking a lot of wonderful high praise about Louie. I will tell you, I met Louie before I arrived in Congress, and I am a freshman, so I haven't had the opportunity to spend as much time with him as many of you have. But before I got here, Louie sat me down, and he told me a story. He was out in Montana doing an event for another member of Congress. And he said, you know, he told me this story. He says, I used to be a judge. I was a judge there in East Texas. And he said, one of the big cases that I had came before me when it was right before an election. And he said, every other judge that had this case presented to them, they had recused themselves because they didn't want to have their fingerprints on it because it was a big problem. It was a man and a wife. There was a domestic problem. There was a murder involved. Half of the town supported the husband. Half of the town supported the wife. And there wasn't a judge around that wanted to get involved in the situation. And Louie said, I thought about it. And he said, I went to prayer that evening, and I was really struggling whether I needed to pick this case up or not, whether I needed to pick that fight or not. And he said, the next morning I got up and knew what I had to do. And he said, it came to me. The words from the Holy Spirit came to me. It said, you can't run from what you ran for. You can't run from what you ran for. And I have carried that message with me as I walk into this chamber on a daily basis because there are so many people that are afraid to do the right thing. And they know what is right. And they walk away, and they hide, and they get other people to help them explain their way out of it. But there is a right, and there is a wrong on what we do up here. And Louie Gomer personifies a man who's willing to stand up and say, this is what's right, and this is what's wrong, and we don't need a deep explanation about it. It's really rather simple. And don't run from what you ran for. It's difficult issues that we are addressing every single day, and this is why we were sent here. They tell us all that we are honorable when we get here. You get letters in the mail. The Honorable Matt Rosendale. The Honorable Weber. The Honorable Higgins. Yeah, the Honorable Biggs. It's not so important when you get here to be called honorable as when you leave, if you can still be addressed as honorable. And I will stand here and tell everyone that Louie Gomer will be considered honorable when he leaves this place, and I am honored to call you my friend. God bless you, and please come and kill a turkey on my place next year. I yield back.
I thank you, gentlemen. It is now my time, my honor to yield to somebody that is honorable, to the gentleman from Arizona. 2 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber. It is really an incredible thing to be here. Before I came to Congress, I'd heard of Louie Gomer. I had no idea that he would be a friend, nor how iconoclastic he is. He is a one-of-a-kind American. And I'll just tell you, I'm not going to tell you, I got a volume of stories. I mean, the way he eats a donut, for instance, we could talk about this, all of these things. I won't do that. But he was larger than life. He is a fearless conservative. He's been on the front lines, fearlessly fighting. His memory, Thomas Massey was talking about, it's copious. It's encyclopedic. And you can never go wrong with saying, hey, Louie, what happened here? And because he's going to know. He has been a friend of the friendless and a champion who offers the balm of Gilead to those who have a lost cause. He's just been an iconoclastic individual. He's going to be missed terribly. I'll tell you what, Louie, we're going to miss you. Your personality, your fun, your joie de vivre, all the things. That's French, Louis. You might not have recognized that, but I mean that your love of life, all the things that you brought to us. But we're going to miss your guitar playing, a little bit anyway. We're really going to miss your ribs. I don't know if anybody else is going to be able to smoke some ribs up on the balcony of the office building over there. Maybe not, but we're sure going to miss him.
But we're going to miss you, my friend. God bless you. Godspeed.
Well, I thank you for those kind words, Representative Biggs. And if you'll get with me later, I'll give you some of those stories and all that we all admire and cherish about Congressman Gomer. And so we appreciate that, Mr. Biggs, and thank you for those kind words. And at this time, it's my pleasure to yield to my neighbor to the east of me, Mr. Clay Higgins, a couple of minutes.
I thank my colleague. I'm so honored to speak on behalf of the people of the country that we serve, the oath that we've sworn, and bid some words of adoration and respect for our brother and friend, Louie Gomer. I've described Louie as a living founding father to those that have inquired as to whether I've known him, which from sea to shining sea, it's a common question. As we travel in service to we the people, we're asked, do you know this fellow, or do you know that lady? And it's quite common to be asked, you know Louie Gomer? And I'm honored to say yes. Louie has represented not just the people of his district, and by extension, the nation that we love and we've sworn to serve, but he has represented the foundational core principles that gave birth to our nation. In Matthew, the words of the Lord stated, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." You, my brother Louie, you should feel satisfied within your soul, good sir, because you have brought the very essence of pure principle and spirit to this great body. This chamber shall forever resonate with your words and your love for God and country. I'm honored to have worked with you, to call you brother and friend. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield my time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. We're going to give the two gentlemen a chance here to express their love for one another. Mr. Speaker, I have watched Louie Gomer for a long time. So much could be said about him. So much has been said about him. Some of it even true. You know, having Louie for one of my very, very good friends gives me status. And, you know, I had a friend in the 5th grade that gave me the measles, and this is a lot better deal. Let me just tell you that. Louie's got a great sense of humor. He's a great patriot. He's a great Christian. We all know that. We've seen him stand for our biblical values time and time and time again. Maybe it sounds a little archaic or a little corny, I don't know, but I think of Roosevelt and his great speech when he said, and it's called The Man in the Arena, because, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, it does apply to Louie Gomer. He's in our arena. He's our fighter. And I remind folks, President Roosevelt said, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who actually strives to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph. At the best, Louie Gomer, the triumph and the end of high achievement. And at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, my good friend Louie Gomer did not fail, has not failed, will not fail. If it fails, the president went on, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory or defeat. Someone who is heavily involved in a situation that requires courage, skill, or tenacity, as opposed to sitting on the sidelines. And the president went on. I will tell you that nothing has discouraged Louie Gomer. Nothing has laid him down in the defeat of the dust, as President Roosevelt described it. He has been a tireless fighter, Louie. You and I have been through a lot of battles. We've seen a lot of things. And some of it we just shake our heads at. But ultimately, we know who's in control. We know that you've done the Lord's bidding. We know that you fought the good fight. We know that you have endured till the end. We know that you have been a sterling example of what President Reagan called a light on a hill. I forget exactly how he said it. But you're one of those points of lights. I think George H.W. used that analogy, that for the rest of us members in Congress could learn from, that people watching on TV, on C-SPAN, and out in America could learn from. Never doubted where you stood, never doubted what you stood for or who you stood for. And I can't tell you how proud I am to be called your friend and to know that. We're going to miss you, but you will not be I have an idea you won't be a stranger. We'll get to see you come back. If nothing else, I still got to get that ribs recipe from you. Still got to get the trademark and that rib recipe from you, the patent on it. You know, in Texas 14, just like your district, we love God, we love our America, we love our freedom, we love our family, we love our guns. And Louie, you have done a tireless, spectacular job of defending all of those, and it shows. You know, we believe what the Bible says. Quite frankly, He made them male and female. a lot of biblical principles. You have stood up for those, for our Lord Jesus Christ, every bit of the way. You know, if you'd and having been the Texas Supreme Court justice, if you'd have told me that on our Supreme Court some of them wouldn't even know what a woman was. From Texas, we just don't get that, do we? We understand what the Bible says. If you'd have told me, if you and I had sat down there 10 years ago and said that the left would be trying to destroy fossil fuels, the things that make our country so great, that we fight for so diligently in Texas, we wouldn't have believed it. You and I have watched a lot of things come down the pike. A lot of things come down the pike. So I could sit here and go all night and all day. I believe we do have the leader coming in eventually to come and to also share a few words. But Louie, if you don't mind, I'd like to yield you some time to just kind of give your thoughts and let us continue and right now learn from you yet some more. I yield to you, my good friend up there, you betcha, Judge Gomer.
I'm so grateful to my fellow Texan, and not saying it lightly, dear friend, with whom a lot of battles have been fought. And I can also honestly say that in my 18 years here, I've never been more uncomfortable on the floor than I have been listening to these comments. I had no idea, I've never asked, I had no idea how much time, if I could yield to the gentleman, is that really right, how much I've spoken?
If the gentleman will yield for just a second.
Yes.
Yeah, the gentleman will yield. Louie, we don't have enough time to talk about how much time that you've actually spent here.
That was
so the floor. It is what your staff said, and it was already pointed out tonight. You do such a great job of hiring competent staff. So absolutely, you better believe it's right. So we're proud of you for that.
Well, thank you. When I came to Congress, I'd seen that the country was in trouble, and having been a history student and loved history, I knew no republic lasts forever. I knew we were about to the extent of the length of time that republics come and go. And I'd hoped to, while here, didn't expect to be here 18 years, but I'd hoped that when I left, I could feel we had perpetuated that liberty for at least another generation, hopefully much more. But as I sat here listening to the gracious comments, I was taken right back to Ben Franklin's speech in the in the Constitutional Convention, 1787, after they couldn't agree on much, but his words, "I've lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth. God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it possible an empire could rise without his aid? We've been assured, sir, in the sacred writing, that unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." And it just seems to me that we have much less concern or desire overall for having the Lord help build the house. And I know historically what that means. So I've been deeply encouraged on seeing the people that have come in since I did, and especially in recent years. And I'm taking great heart from the fact that we've got some fighters that have come in. And if I've helped inspire some, as they said, that's something I can take with me. But I will continue to follow what goes on here, help any way I can, and am very grateful. I see my dear friend from Louisiana, and I thank God that he brought him through his brush with death, because we've been better for him being here.